Previously on the Watchtower Database.
He called himself Dr. Manhat's Ted.
Every time that a pairing of us would fail him, he would then destroy that reality.
No! I've got to send out my Justice League vs. the Fatal 5 timeline notes in time for...
Judging by the laptop's internal clock, I'd say you're about 40 years from now, whenever now is.
Time travel? That means there's probably a future me running around here somewhere.
They released this many DCAU movies in the future? Oh man, I'm gonna be timelining forever!
No, you don't understand. If you keep doing this, you'll end up a head in a jar, just like me.
People finally accept Batman and Harley Quinn as part of the DCAU? Wait, what's this footnote?
Will it canon? That is the question.
Oh my god, I have to go back!
Maddie, are you down here?
Program rebooting. Initiating will it canon in 5, 4, 3,
what is happening?
2.
What is happening? This is all a lie, a mistake, an error.
Error? Error doing what?
Error.
Oh my.
The can runneth over. The future has taken root in the present. The door swings both ways.
How long have you had time travel powers?
Since the Sub-Zero timeline video, I think?
I have time travel powers! God damn it.
This whole canon thing, why get bogged down in all the negativity? It's all so clear to me now. It doesn't matter.
Hello? Stop! What is this? Hello? Stop.
Is this thing on? Am I recording?
Maddie?
Okay. Whoever's listening,
Maddie!
I gotta get it all out there. I cannot let the horrors of my captivity...
Maddie, what the hell is
I must document a record of all that has transpired, so that one day I may escape this wreckage. And the world will know the true evils that walk behind this YouTube channel's proverbial curtain. Not only
How
will
long
it expose
has...
the Watchtower Database,
okay.
but it will be the evidence needed to finally release me from these prison depths. James has forced me to live within this basement ever since the production of the Batman and Harley Quinn timeline video. If you can even call this a life. I have been instructed, against my will, to create video content or else suffer the consequences, the specifics of which I know not and have been far too frightened for my life to question. It's been roughly a year since James locked me down here in the basement. I have a hard time keeping track sometimes. Now, I've retreated to a small room I dug out while those contractors James hired were mucking around with the renovations. Here, I began my research. Undisturbed by the myriad distractions of the DC animated universe, and far from the groves of what some might call academe. Today is, if I have this right, September 14th, roughly 5 a.m. A basement is not a place one considers for their summer home, let alone their seemingly permanent dwelling. All I wanted was to help James unravel the secrets of the DC Animated Universe timeline. But no! He had to have all the spotlight, all the fame. It's enough to push a person to the brink of insanity. And now, after much deliberation, the promised day has come. Through countless trials, the DNA I collected from James has successfully synthesized.
What? How did Maddie get my DNA?
The DNA was easy enough to obtain. He left it all over the house. Not remotely what I meant.
Okay.
By following the guidelines of Poison Ivy's character arc in the DCAU, I've managed to create...
Wait, these are my notes from back when I watched and read every single DCAU Poison Ivy appearance months ago. I thought these went missing. Maddie must have stolen them from me, hidden them down here for something devious. What the hell is all this crap? The key to unraveling all this must be hidden within Poison Ivy's story. So if I'm gonna find out what happened here, I too need to document this. Cozy. Poison Ivy has one of the most complicated histories of any character in the entire DC Animated Universe. So many different writers and artists have held the reins of the villainous Pamela Lillian Isley over the course of nearly 30 years of cartoon episodes, tie-in comics, movies, and the many other mediums that make up this version of DC Comics lore, to the point where her characterization and timeline have become nearly impossible to track. But within these pages of notes, somewhere lies the answer. Who is Poison Ivy? Or, I'll do you one better, what is Poison Ivy? To understand why this is even a question to begin with, let's refer to the second volume of the widely considered canon Batman Adventures tie-in comic book from 2003. These stories were primarily written by BTAS comic alum Ty Templeton and Dan Slott, a team that took on the challenge of cataloging what Batman was up to during the events of the Justice League cartoon that kept him busy enough to never become a full-time member of the superhero team.
I'm not really a people person. I don't have to do anything. I'm a part-timer, remember?
What's important to bring up about this comic series is the way they chose to handle Poison Ivy. From the very first issue, she was a notably greener hue than her previous New Batman Adventures self. We saw her stabbed by an assassin and live. She went on to bleed green blood, pop thorns out of her body, need carbon dioxide to breathe, and grow vines from her head instead of normal human hair. All uncharacteristic of anything we'd ever seen her do before. But it was revealed at the tail end of the series that the Ivy we'd been seeing this whole comic run was, in fact, not Pamela Isley at all, but a plant-based clone that the real Ivy had left behind, quote, a few years back. But because this comic series was cancelled in favor of the tie-in to the 2004 The Batman cartoon, we never got answers to what was really going on here. How long had Ivy not been Ivy? How long had we been thinking we were reading and watching stories about Pamela Isley when they were really about a fake plant monster that just looked like her? And with the character of Poison Ivy later appearing as her usual supervillain self in the Batman and Harley Quinn movie and in Justice League vs. the Fatal Five, which are set a few years later down the timeline, is that Ivy the real Ivy or a clone as well? In Batman and Harley Quinn, when Batman gives us an exposition rundown on Poison Ivy and her cohort, the Floronic Man, he says,
"Neither of them was ever fully human to begin with."
So to even try and start comprehending all of this, we need to go back to the very beginning. Back to Poison Ivy's first appearance in the Batman the Animated Series episode, Pretty Poison, and see just what the deal is with her humanity from the start. Here, Pamela Isley seduces and poisons District Attorney Harvey Dent. You know, the guy who will eventually become Two-Face, but he ain't Two-Face yet here. This was all via special lipstick Isley concocted from the thorns of an endangered wild rose, one that Dent nearly made extinct with his construction of Stonegate Penitentiary 5 years earlier. When Batman tracks down Isley to get the antidote, she debuts her Poison Ivy persona. But she seems pretty human in her first appearance here. She even seems to blot the antidote on her neck as if to help protect herself from exposure to the poison. And it takes this special lipstick to infect Dent, compared with her seemingly only needing lip-to-lip contact in later appearances, including Batman and Harley Quinn. So there's some kind of evolution going on here, but we don't quite know all the details. Interestingly, in contrast with other Batman rogues, like Two-Face here, or Man-Bat, Clayface, Mr. Freeze, Harley Quinn, the list goes on and on. We don't actually ever see Poison Ivy's real origin story. We don't know how she became Poison Ivy, other than this kind of lackluster, because she mad at a dude. At least, not on screen. In Ivy's official Warner Brothers Batman the Animated Series biography, we learn she has a hyperactive immune system that causes her body to reject any infection, poison, or outside contamination. And in the Batman the Animated Series guidebook, released several years later, it's tacked on that she was born immune to the poisonous plants she loves. In fact, her dangerous experiments with lethal leaves gave her a toxic touch.
Everything I touch dies!
If we consider Poison Ivy's poison immunity to be a superpower of sorts, we can more or less track its growth throughout BTAS, its sequel series, The New Batman Adventures, and into the Justice League era with those Batman Adventures comics I mentioned earlier. She starts off pretty tame. As she says in the BTAS episode, Almost Got Him,
I have this natural immunity against poisons, toxins, the pain and suffering of others. Go figure.
Other instances of this aspect of her character being cemented include the Joker's flower gas not working on her in the episode Harley and Ivy, as well as her telling Harley,
Now, you're not immune to poison like I am.
Or in Batman and Robin Adventures number 24, where she's unaffected by an Amazonian boy's bodily toxins that are otherwise incapacitating or killing anyone he touches. So the biographies ain't lying. Conversely, the mainstream DC comic book version of Poison Ivy has had a couple different origins over the decades, but none of them include her being literally born the way she is. Usually she's been experimented on, or she experimented on herself, or, well, there's always the Batman and Robin version.
I'm afraid you'll have to die.
Good old John Glover. That guy voiced the Riddler, you know.
Somebody tell me how he did it!
Anyway, while doing research on Ivy, I, of course, like any good DCAU scholar, got my hands on the recent Poison Ivy's Rainforest Revenge kids book published by Capstone in 2017. Midway through the book, Bruce Wayne divulges Ivy origin info to Tim Drake, talking about how she was once just a shy girl who was led astray by the evil botanist Dr. Woodrue. He replaced Ivy's blood with chlorophyll. But that wasn't all. He also injected her with a whole host of allergens. She's filled with toxins and is truly part plant herself. It was at this point that I was like, whoa, holy egg baby noise. Did I just stumble upon the greatest DCAU Poison Ivy discovery in the history of DCAU Poison Ivy discoveries? But then I emailed the author of the book, Sarah Hines Stevens, and she basically said, LOL, DC just told me to use their comic book encyclopedia for her backstory. So never mind. As far as we can tell, this Ivy was Lady Gaga born this way. There's a handful of other bits of evidence that she has above-human abilities throughout even this early animated series era, like in the episode Eternal Youth, where she jumps pretty far out of a tree and lands with injuryless ease. She's also slammed into a roof by a giant tree, shattering the glass ceiling at the end of the episode, and survives this. So, okay, we know about her early days, but what motivates her to commit crimes? Why be Poison Ivy at all? And no, it's not just because she's mad at a dude, I already told you that. She's actually mad at several dudes. As with most television shows, there's something called a writer's Bible, which details the personalities, direction, and story beats for each main character in a series. Or, well, the original intentions anyway. For BTAS, the Writer's Bible gave us loads of information on characters' backstories, like that of the Penguin, who spent his childhood in the safe space of his mother's exotic bird store until bullies killed all the birds and he swore revenge. This is something we never see in any episode, but we're informed of this origin via the series Bible. And we never learn anything about the Penguin later that contradicts this, so it's pretty safe to say that it's still intact. And the same can be said for Poison Ivy. In her BTAS Bible entry, we learn she grew up a shy young girl who cared for her family's greenhouse, until one day a gang attacked her and wound up burning down the greenhouse and all the plants inside. She swore that she would find a way to use and humiliate all men for the way she was abused. This hatred of men is a theme of Poison Ivy's character that's probably the most consistent of anything about her. She always prefers the company of plants to human beings, aside from her mostly consistent tolerance/love for Harley Quinn. But she specifically exemplifies an anti-dude code of conduct, purposely targeting Bruce Wayne in Eternal Youth, disrupting a meeting of the male-only Peregrinators Club in Harley and Ivy, as well as insisting that no man can take us prisoner, before being ironically apprehended by Officer Renee Montoya. But humans in general continue to come into the crosshairs of her carpus-mounted crossbow, as is perhaps best expressed in this moment from the BTAS episode Trial.
Then it doesn't bother you when someone, let's say the judge here, plucks a defenseless flower from the warm green earth, that its petals must die? Stop it. One by one until it's all gone, honey.
So we've established that during the BTAS era of the timeline, Poison Ivy is Pamela Isley, a former botanist who was born with immunity to poisons and toxins, who seeks to put an end to humankind, specifically mankind. But she is a human. At least at this point. No idea how she wound up being magically poison-proof from birth, but it is what it is.
The metahuman thesis.
More likely than not, these exceptional beings live among us. The basis of our myths, gods among men upon our little blue planet here.
It's in one of her final appearances in BTAS, the episode House and Garden, that we come to know a lot more about Poison Ivy and what's to come in the future. Like plant clones and stuff. In this episode, mysterious plant creatures are attacking Gotham. Batman obviously believes Poison Ivy to be behind it, but Ivy has been clean for 6 months. She went through rehab, got married, and is living with her husband, Stephen Carlisle, and his 2 sons, Chris and Kelly. When semi-interrogated by Batman and Commissioner Gordon in her home, Ivy reveals she was never able to have kids of her own.
I never thought about having kids before. I can't. Nature's little trade-off for my hyperimmune system.
A mistrust of Ivy leads to a whole bunch of shenanigans where Batman tails her the whole episode, unconvinced that she's truly reformed. It isn't until Robin reveals that the kids, Chris and Kelly, should be girls that the two have motive to investigate further, and they discover an underground laboratory in the Carlisle's backyard. Here, they find out Ivy has been creating plant offspring of sorts, vegetable versions of the Carlisles with an accelerated growth cycle that leads to them deteriorating into horrifying cactus creatures. This isn't the first time that Ivy has dabbled in human-plant hybridization, and is actually a natural progression of her work throughout the cartoon. Besides a couple of times where she's seen with human henchpeople, Ivy has pretty much always been shown to have partially anthropomorphic plant minions, like this fella I've been mentally referring to as Rootface from the Adventures of Batman and Robin Sega CD game, the cutscenes of which have been fan-dubbed the animated series Lost Episode. Then there's her experiments in Eternal Youth, which slowly but surely transform humans into, well, basically tree people. Her freakish humanoid plants in House and Garden are essentially the pinnacle of this experimentation, at least for the moment. But that's not where this BTAS episode peaks. At the end, when Batman defeats Ivy's plant monsters by melting them with Weed Killer, Ivy comes up to witness the destruction and, well, she also starts melting.
But Ivy could replicate herself.
What?
As it turns out, this Ivy, from at least the last few minutes of the episode, was also a veggie replica. As she dies at Batman's feet, the real Pamela Isley is safe and sound, miles high in the air, having used this ruse as a means of escaping custody. We've now seen what Ivy is truly capable of. Creating life, turning plants into essentially people. She continues this trend in the new Batman Adventures era, during which time we see humanoid plant goons on motorcycles in the video game Batman Chaos in Gotham, the same cactus dudes from BTAS in Batman Vengeance, and of course the many and varied plant people she implements to seduce and marry Gotham's wealthy elite in the episode Chemistry, a scheme even Bruce Wayne falls victim to. Here, Ivy's plant people have evolved to be much more level-headed, free-thinking, and virtually identical to humans, not unlike the Ivy clone we saw at the end of House and Garden. That is, unless you rip their skin off and reveal their jolly green giant birthday suits, but that's not the point. The point is, we're basically one step away from the convincing, might as well be the real deal Ivy clone from the Batman Adventures Volume 2 comic, which by Maddie's timeline calculations, which I forced into being by locking Maddie in my basement for wow, I've even lost track of how long. Take place barely a year after this show, likely even less. In this era, Ivy is also noticeably different in appearance. To be fair, this is the case for pretty much every character, like everyone's favorite Joker redesign, but Ivy's is touched on specifically by Paul Dini in his Batman animated retrospective book. More drastic were the changes to Poison Ivy, still lovely though markedly less human looking. To accent her new look, Bruce Timm added dead white skin, underlining the fact that Ivy's beauty is indeed a fatal one. So, is the Ivy we see in the new Batman Adventures already the clone from Batman Adventures Volume 2? The issue of that comic where the clone dies takes place in roughly fall of the DCAU's 2001. And to reiterate, Pamela Isley says she created the clone a few years back. That would well encompass the time period of the TNBA cartoon, which runs from roughly summer 1999 through sometime in 2000. It's not impossible, but writer Ty Templeton did give us his perspective back in our July 2004, about a month after this clone issue came out. The Ivy clone was substituted whenever you want her to be, but in my mind, it was somewhere between the last issue of Gotham Adventures and the first issue of the new Batman Adventures. Meaning the new volume of Batman Adventures, not the new Batman Adventures cartoon. I know that's confusing. All of this is, just bear with me. Ty continued, but I wouldn't retcon away 2 seasons worth of appearances by Ivy. That would be rude. So in my mind, the plant monster version shows up in Batman Adventures Volume 2 number 1 when Dan and I started writing it. Every other Ivy story is still intact. Or you can believe she's been a clone since TNBA. That's part of the fun of the ending. So in Ty's mind, no. The Ivy we see in the revamped cartoon is, in fact, not a plant clone, but still the real Poison Ivy, Pamela Isley. But with Dini and Tim's conscious decision to make her markedly less human-looking, do we presume that Isley has just continued to evolve in terms of her planty abilities? Well, interestingly enough, there's actually a ton of instances of her exhibiting the same non-humanisms as her future clone self in this era. Dini specifies in Batman Animated that because of her unique body chemistry, Ivy can generate pheromones strong enough to enslave any man, and her kisses are Chernobyl-level toxic.
Rubber lips are immune to your charms.
Like I mentioned earlier, there's many times where Ivy used a specialized lipstick for this purpose in BTAS, whereas in TNBA and onward, she simply kisses people directly, as if this is an ability she's now developed. Was it because of so much contact with the lipstick? We don't know. She does use the lipstick once in this era in Holiday Nights, but I've always chalked that up to the episode being an almost panel-for-panel recreation of the Batman Adventures Holiday Special, which was set in the Batman the Animated Series era, so there's at least kind of an excuse for that one. We continue to see signs of her plant-related evolution in the new Batman Adventures and Justice League eras, such as the Gotham Adventures tie-in comic where she's placed inside a big plastic bag labeled Biohazard Risk, the Batgirl Adventures comic where she can spit acid, and the Gotham Girls comic, which as far as we can tell is set during the early days of Justice League, where she melts through handcuffs by secreting acid from her skin. In Gotham Adventures, Batman also defeats her once by flooding the room she's in with oxygen, which knocks her out, saying, "People do need oxygen. Plants need carbon dioxide." So her body chemistry is clearly changing from human to plant. But is it because she, Pamela Isley, is changing? Or could this be the plant clone starting in TNBA? This is the part where I start to sound a bit hypocritical. In the past, we've almost always taken producer commentary as word of God. Aside from some screwy quotes that contradict in-universe evidence, if Bruce Timm or Paul Dini or Dwayne McDuffie or whoever says something is the case in the DCAU, we usually abide by that. Like, Wonder Woman is 18. Yeah, they're the people who made this stuff, after all, and Ty Templeton certainly falls into that same level of holiness. So when he says the Poison Ivy we see in the new Batman Adventures isn't the clone, I'm inclined to agree. However, there's some stuff that happens with her character that just, to me, cannot be explained unless she is the clone this early on. For reference, what do we know about the plant clone that's different from the Ivy we see in the cartoons? Well, the most obvious difference is her physical appearance. Compared with the Caucasian skin tone of Pamela Isley or the gray skin tone of whoever the Ivy is we see in TNBA, the clone's skin is green, which eventually includes the addition of thorns, vine-like hair, and finally floral growth right before her death. She's visibly more plant-like than her predecessors. In the Gotham Girls comic, her skin is also green. Since this comic likely takes place in the Justice League era, and so does Batman Adventures Volume 2, when she's a clone the whole time, it's safe to assume this Ivy is also the clone. This is backed up by the fact that in Gotham Girls number 2, we see Ivy flash back to the events of Pretty Poison, and she misremembers them? In the episode, she's clearly there at the groundbreaking of Stonegate Penitentiary, but in the comic, she recalls being at home watching it on TV. Clone Ivy's memories are also shown to be sporadic and incorrect. In Batman Adventures, she believes herself to be the real Ivy and recalls inaccurately that she experimented on herself and played with her cell structure, which is disproven moments afterward by the real Ivy after the clone melts away. This leads me to believe that Pamela Isley, when creating her botanical doppelganger, implanted false memories into it so it wouldn't have any reason to believe it wasn't the real her. Unlike the plant clone we saw at the end of House and Garden that knew it wasn't the real deal. Line this up with the Gotham Girls goof, and we've got ourselves a clone theory a-brewin'. And aside from the powers she exhibits as a plant clone, there are also consistent weaknesses. The trading card series that covered various BTAS episodes states of the ending of House and Garden, the liquid dissolves the creatures, and Batman explains that he loaded the system with Weed Killer. Poison Ivy too collapses as the liquid hits her. She wasn't the real Ivy at all, but a plant lookalike. A spray of Weed Killer hurts her again in clone form in Batman Adventures Volume 2, number 16, where she even exclaims, "You hurt me, human!" as though she's coming to understand that she's not too human herself. But beyond the Batman Adventures Gotham Girls overlapping, another Justice League era appearance of the character that shouldn't be ignored is in the Justice Lords universe, in the episode A Better World, where she's been lobotomized by Superman. Here, she also has green skin. Is this a plant clone as well? Could a plant clone even be lobotomized? Ivy's plant people in TNBA could walk through laser beams unharmed, and would a plant person even have a brain?
I wonder if Pete Rat has a brain.
I don't know how any of that works, but it does remind me that technically taking her skin color into consideration doesn't actually have any bearing. Ivy's melanin count leaning to or from the G range of Photoshop's color picker isn't nearly as consistent as you might think. Or hope. It would certainly help our clone analysis if it went BTAS is human skin tone, TNBA is gray, clone is green. But she has Caucasian skin color in 2 issues of Gotham Adventures, as well as multiple, possibly canon, possibly not, Justice League Adventures issues, all of which take place after BTAS. She has gray skin in her Static Shock appearance, Hard as Nails, which Maddie's timeline research has placed during Justice League. She even has gray skin throughout the Gotham Girls webtoons, which theoretically happen around the same time as its comic counterpart, where she has green skin. So could we consider Ivy's skin to be under the same artistic interpretation umbrella as Batman's costumes or the Joker's face? Gotham Adventures artist Tim Levins weighed in with, as before, I assume most of the inconsistencies are mistakes, or simply the whim of the colorists on a given day. In Gotham Adventures number 45, she has both green and normal skin tone, which is odd. Can she change it at will? Who knows? Okay, now we're getting into some real fan theory territory. With Batsuit color changing logic, we don't really have to explain Ivy's skin tone changes, but what if Ivy could change her skin tone at will during the TNBA era? Because she is already a plant clone. As I said, if we take the Batman Adventures Volume 2 dialogue to be literal, when Pamela says she created the clone a few years back, then the TNBA Ivy could certainly be the same clone. If she had false memories from the real Ivy, not only would she maintain her feelings for Harley Quinn, she'd presumably maintain her chemistry expertise, allowing her to make rich people swooning vegetable zombies. And she'd, in theory, be able to survive sinking beneath the waves at the end of that episode. We can easily boost this theory by examining Ivy's diet, of all things. Though I couldn't really tell you why human Ivy is only ever shown to consume plant life. In Harley and Ivy, she eats and serves Harley steamed chard and beet juice. In Almost Got Him, she orders an herbal tea at the poker table. And yet, during the Batman and Harley Quinn tie-in comics, it's hammered home that she does not eat plants, period. She prepares eggs, bacon, and ham in one issue, and in another retorts, "What do you think plant food is, new guy? It's everything else in the world but plants." Butt plants. So all of this could be understood as, once she is a plant, she doesn't eat plants. If only the real Pamela Isley had walked through the door in Batman Adventures eating like a big old head of lettuce or something.
Locally grown water lettuce.
Water lettuce party!
That would really hammer this idea home. Now, the diet thing could just be coincidence, but we gotta use everything we can here. The DCAU didn't exactly spell this out for us. We have to take the Tupperware of loose Legos they did give us and build whatever crude castle or spaceship we can out of them. And with that in mind, I want to bring up one final recurring trait of Poison Ivy in the DCAU: her ability to control plant life. Throughout every single one of her appearances, Ivy uses a sort of plant telepathy, for lack of a better term, to communicate with various floras and command them to do her bidding, whether it's attacking superheroes, causing physical destruction, or becoming an elevator. And this is true of every version of Poison Ivy that we see. Her personal trading card even states she has turned her mastery of plant life to deadly ends. But an interesting concept that was introduced in the Harley Quinn and Batman comic miniseries, the prequel to the Batman and Harley Quinn movie, was the fact that supposedly Ivy could only previously control plants of her own creation. Plants she planted in the first place. The Floronic Man teaches Ivy how to tap into the green, a sort of Star Wars The Force-like psychic connection with and manipulation of plant life. In issue number 4 of the series, Ivy exclaims, "This is amazing. I've only been able to do this with plants I created myself, but this kind of control over wild things," with Floronic Man butting in,
"It's not merely control, Ivy. It's also a surrender. You're merging with it, allowing it to move, not forcing it. Remember that."
Floronic Man is showing Ivy how to, for the first time it seems, control any plant she wishes, not just ones she created. But does this hold up with Ivy's previous DCAU appearances over the preceding 25 years? In the entirety of Batman the Animated Series, it's never a point of focus to tell the audience, Ivy made this plant she's controlling right now, she made it, she did it, it's hers, but it can be presumed usually. Her debut, Pretty Poison, features a giant Bruce Timm dubbed vagina with teeth plant monster. I don't think that exists without her creating it in a lab. Score 1 point for plant creation. In House and Garden, vines on the outside of her house tie up Batman. No reason to believe she didn't plant those. A shipment of plants she sends to the Gotham City Police Department in I Love to Read Batman and Superman number 36 is even described by her as my plants. She has an army of custom hedge animals in Girls' Night Out.
My baby!
Or in Chemistry,
my seaweed's crushing your hull.
The plants in the TNBA Claritin tie-in are my pets. The tentacle-like vines in Batman Vengeance are
my babies!
And the list goes on and on and on. It's a running theme.
The plant world belongs to me!
But then we get to stuff like the Batman, Harley, and Ivy comic, which we've narrowed down to likely taking place during Justice League Unlimited around the same time as Batman and Harley Quinn, where Ivy, complete with green skin, just saying, purposely pricks her hand and uses her blood to tap into moss growing inside the sewer, and later takes part in a seemingly orgasmic experience among the plant life of fictional Costa Verde. She follows this up by using a vine to attack an enemy, which clearly is growing out of the forest floor. So for all intents and purposes, I think we can assume, since she didn't know how to control just any plant until Batman and Harley Quinn, the Ivy we see in the Harley and Ivy comic is the same Ivy from that movie. And that Ivy, well, I ask the same question I asked all the way back at the start of this video. Is she also a plant clone or what? The clone from Batman Adventures died a couple years before this movie takes place. And Batman said,
neither of them was ever fully human to begin with.
But Batman wasn't there when this clone melted into the arms of Alec Holland. He wasn't witness to the real Ivy waltzing in the room like, oh yeah, that old thing? That ain't me. Would he even know there was a plant clone? Well, besides this one, but that's not what I'm talking about. Batman does know about Alec Holland's explosive accident that led him to becoming Swamp Thing, as he explains near the start of the movie.
Alec Holland was working on a biorestorative formula to turn deserts into forests until a saboteur's bomb destroyed that dream.
So would he have known that Pamela Isley, the real Pamela Isley, was also in that bio laboratory around the same time? My melting brain goes one of three places. Either Pamela created another plant clone and literally died in the explosion in the lab, and the Ivy we see from here on out on the timeline is indeed a clone, another one. Or the lab explosion caused the already dead clone to revive somehow, either via lab chemicals exploding or the swamp juices consuming her, with Pamela also dying in this scenario. Or Pamela herself got caught up in the explosion that turned Alec into Swamp Thing, and she also bailed into the swamp and gained much more in tune with the green plant superpowers. DC Comics swamps be doing some crazy shit. With option 3, Batman's line of never human to begin with, then presumably stops being about her being an actual plant and more about what we talked about earlier with her genetic makeup from birth.
I have this natural immunity against poisons, toxins, the pain and suffering of others.
So, what in the name of the Parliament of Trees can we take away from all of this? With the mindset of, why not try to make everything work if we can? As far as a mini timeline of Poison Ivy's character progression goes, we're looking at something like this. Pamela Lillian Isley, human Caucasian woman of 28 years of age, debuts in the BTAS episode Pretty Poison, where she's naturally immune to poisons and toxins, but still a person. Homo sapien. Maybe meta Homo sapien, but still. La la la, we truck through the whole show and boom! She plays Batman for a fool and distracts him from her victory with her first plant clone of herself, which melts away into icky green slop. Technically, timeline-wise, she does return to Gotham in the episode Lockup and still looks very human, even maintaining this look in Batman Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles adventures at the tail end of the BTAS era. Maybe she's a plant clone even this early, and the gray skin in TNBA is the start of her deterioration. When she shows back up in the new Batman adventures, maybe this is the start of the plant clonage, maybe it isn't. As Ty said, that's part of the fun. If I were to decide, I'd say that yes, once the plant clones start rolling out, they're here to stay, and the real BTAS-haired Ivy flew away to start spending all her time in Louisiana with Alec Holland. Then that clone ages and matures as time passes over the next couple years throughout TNBA, Gotham Girls, and Batman Adventures Volume 2, eventually dissolving into a pile of flowers in Holland's hands. Now we're into even more mysterious territory, where, like I just hypothesized, either the real Isley creates another clone to take her place while she continues her research with Holland, the Batman Adventures clone gets revived, or Pamela herself is the Ivy we see going forward. Either way, that Ivy shows up again in the Batman and Harley Quinn stuff, Batman, Harley, and Ivy, and a brief cameo in Justice League versus the Fatal Five. That's how I see it, anyway. And while we can squint at all her DCAU appearances and mesh them together pretty coherently, and knowing it's quite possible she'll show up again and muddy all this even more, it's important to remember that everything I've brought up here was written by a different person than the last. Regarding the Ivy clone's inconsistent memories of the events of Pretty Poison, I spoke with the writer of the Gotham Girls comic, Paul Story, and well, his answer kind of lets the air out of things. The simple answer is that I screwed up. As I recall, I watched all the necessary episodes before beginning the comics, so the flub on issue 2 is down to bad note-taking on my part. I probably wrote down something like, Ivy watches groundbreaking, and didn't remember clearly what that meant a couple months later when I wrote the issue. I'd give you a big ol' no prize if it were a Marvel comic and I was Stan Lee, or Roy Thomas, or, well, you get the picture. I like the explanation you came up with, but it's flat out down to my faulty memory, not the clone Ivy's. I like the idea that the plant clone's memories were fuzzy, but it was just me taking bad notes and assuming watching meant on TV. Oops. He continued, keeping in mind that my recollections are now old enough to vote. I recall that Ivy was exhibiting more plant powers, as you described Ty and Dan implementing in Batman Adventures Volume 2. So what I was doing, in terms of her secreting acid, was following what they were doing in their book, and as I recall, the sort of stuff she had done in the TNBA cartoon and the Gotham Girls web series. I didn't know at the time that they were going to reveal she was a plant clone Ivy, just wrote Ivy as I saw her portrayed at the time. I really wish I had a cool behind-the-scenes story about how this was all grandly coordinated, but not so much. So, Paul likes the clone theory, but doesn't subscribe to it, unlike you, who should subscribe to the Watchtower Database YouTube channel. But to me, that's really the only way we can make sense of all of this. As we know from countless other instances, often the creative teams of the cartoons and the comics, or in this case, different simultaneous comics, barely talked with each other, if at all. They just used each other's work as a base for their own. This can and did lead to all sorts of miscommunications that we now have to figure out like some sort of laborious fact-finding hell of our own creation, as is the case with our girl Poison Ivy here. Even Ty Templeton himself has expressed his views on the opposing continuities of stories he wrote for the DCAU, including the Harley Quinn and Batman Adventures Volume 2 comics, saying, "Since so much of what Dan and I did in the last volume of Batman Adventures, including revealing that the Green Ivy was a clone and not the original, etc., was ignored in continuity for the new Batman and Harley movie, I had to more or less shunt it aside for the sake of the new project. And I figured if I had to choose one canon over another, I chose whatever was on the screen first and foremost. Too many authors going their own way, or spending time puttying up holes in varied continuities, doesn't make for good fiction for the readers." So, in the end, while I don't think the continuity of Ty's DCAU projects is messed up, and it can work together just fine, as with anything else, the story comes first, and continuity comes second. Or not at all. And even if the creators of this content would like to sweep stuff that doesn't fit under a rug and move forward, analyzing it all as one giant bundle of information is really the only way to even try to answer the clone question we've all had on our minds since 2004. While I know I'm not the only person alive who cares about this Ivy conundrum, it's almost my obligation to attack it, because I also know for a fact that I am the only person alive that has an Atlas Shrugged thickness level Necronomicon of notes on the subject. Except, I don't remember these pages back here. This is Maddie's handwriting. Formulas, equations. I'm no scientist, but I'd almost say they were trying to hone in on how Ivy cloned herself. Like Maddie was recreating the experiment.
By following the guidelines of Poison Ivy's character arc in the DCAU, I have managed to create a digital replication of James's body and consciousness that I call Data James.
James? Good Lord. What are you? I'm you. As far as I can. You're not human. No. Hey. Maddie. Maddie's not here. I don't know where. No, listen, Maddie did this.
My structure, it's failing outside of the program.
I don't know what to do. How do I help you?
Just listen to me. All that stuff you were typing to me in there, it all makes sense.
Typing? I wasn't. What? I've been talking about Poison Ivy for the last half an hour or probably more.
What? If it wasn't you, then... There's so little time, James.
What?
You've got to... It's not what you think it is. It doesn't matter. It's multiple choice. You choose your own...
Should have guessed that might happen.
Maddie, how did... What the fuck is going on?
That dialogue wasn't scripted, but that dude, my dude, was your clone. Not only your perfect physical duplicate, but he really believed he was you. You only ever did do that one episode of Will It Canon on Brainiac attacks, and then just abandoned the idea for some reason, which led to the perfect setup. I could pass along the idea to him, and he could make boatloads of extra content while I looked for a way to get out of this place.
I don't understand.
I started playing the tapes today. I wanted you to understand why I did what I did and get us on common ground. Data James, I called him, because he's like you, but made out of data. Anyway, he was my only way out of here. At least, I thought so. Man, there is a lot that I've got to catch you up on.
How could you? That is a huge betrayal of trust. I thought we were friends.
Friends? Do people put their friends in a tiny-ass room in their basement and lock them down there with nothing but a camera setup, a couple pairs of clothes, and whatever food they decide to throw down the ventilation shaft every now and then? Jesus Christ, James, who is the villain here?
What, you can't tell me you didn't enjoy it. You got to talk about cartoons and watch Batman all day.
There's more to life than that, you jackass.
I know that.
Do you?
The clone thing crosses a line.
James, you have no idea how unimportant that is right now. I've just been to the future. We make Batman and Harley Quinn canon with the Will It Canon series. We are credited with the entire fandom finally accepting it as part of the DCAU. Look, I got a screenshot of future Wikipedia. If Dana James is dead, you and I have to do this together.
You think I give one shit about Batman and Harley Quinn? You've been to the future? This is ridiculous. I'm out.
Oh my god, James, just listen to me. Stop. Why are you being so difficult? How many rooms does this basement even have?
Yes, go ahead, you two. Bicker, squabble. In short time, it will mean nothing. After all, the fate of everything lies in your hands.